The OC Forum has never wavered in offering programs that bring great conversations to the forefront of our communities. That's what we want to be in today, another great conversation. Because of the recent wave of hate crimes and anti-Semitic incidents occurring in our backyards, we felt it was necessary for us to pause and reflect on how we got here and what strategies we need to consider to seek a more civil union that binds us all. With this program, we hope to bring you closer to the history and closer to the art of healing hate in America with grace, courage, and perseverance. Before we get started, I would like to recognize all of our sponsors for their generous and continuous support of our programs, and indeed, this is a special program. A complete list can be found on the programs at your tables and on the screen. I would also like to take this time to acknowledge our board members, some of whom are here with us today. And if you would all please take a moment to stand and be recognized. Board members. Thank you very much. We are also delighted to have with us today John Forsythe, President of the Pacific Symphony. John is one of our great leaders in the OC arts landscape, and we wanted to invite him to say a few words before lunch. John?
Well, we're very grateful to the OC Forum for giving us an opportunity, a platform to share the story that has moved so many of us as we undertook this project. Joellen Chatham was the force behind this idea of having Murry come here today, and I want to thank Joellen very much for that, and Paul, thank you for agreeing. On a personal level, the Defiant Requiem spoke to me because my parents came from Europe as Holocaust survivors. And one of the things that my folks taught me was the centrality of art and culture to their own ability to survive and achieve resilience. And when my dad, when he escaped Poland into the Soviet Union, sang partisan songs on the radio in Russia, my mother would sneak into concerts in occupied Budapest. These were all ways for her and him to find resilience. And I think one of the great messages of this project, Defiant Requiem, is how do we find meaning, like Viktor Frankl spoke so beautifully in the book Man's Search for Meaning. How do we find meaning under the most profound difficulty, the great stressors that we experience in our life? And so I'm hopeful that the concert is really immersive for you, that it's actually a way to reflect on life's meaning, to maybe share your own sense of what it means to be an American and how we as a country have been vigilant to fight for freedom and tolerance. And when we confront intolerance, we continue to battle for a deeper understanding of the differences that we have, but the commonality we have as human beings. The Pacific Symphony is in its 40th year this year. We are the newest major orchestra in America. We just were invited to be in the what's so-called Group 1 orchestras of the League of American Orchestras, which means we share the same grouping as the LA Phil, New York Phil, and Chicago Symphony, and that happened in one generation. But budget and activity size is not really what measures a great institution. It's how one serves one's community. So with these concerts that we started this year with the Lunar New Year, we celebrated Asian culture. We just recently celebrated Iranian culture, the Nowruz celebration. We were the first orchestra to achieve a travel ban waiver, which was an amazing thing to get people out of Iran to come and perform on our stage, great artists with the Pacific Symphony. It was a beautiful event. And of course, we learned that Jews, Zoroastrian, Christian, they're all in the audience for this wonderful celebration of Nowruz, and Muslim, of course. So this last event of our 40th anniversary, which is the Building Communities Initiative, is Defiant Requiem. And it happens on Tuesday. You'll be hearing a complete performance of the Verdi Requiem. You'll learn a little bit today of the paradox that a Catholic Mass serves such an important role for Jews imprisoned at Terezin. And you'll learn about this extraordinary place, Terezin, in Czechoslovakia. I will tell you that the tickets for this concert are very sparse. There are only a handful left. And so you're like getting the news that if you actually want to come and don't have tickets, really call our office today. We may have a few that are returned and this and that, but really it's very sparse. So we're pleased that it's almost sold out, and it will be sold out. And we're also very honored that so many people in the community stepped up to support this project, most notably the Jewish Federation of Orange County. We would not have undertaken this event if not for a lead gift made through a trust to the Federation, which then came to the Pacific Symphony, to bring awareness to the survivors that are still in Orange County. There are several hundred Holocaust survivors here, some of whom are indigent and need a lot of support. And so the Federation is now undertaking a capital campaign to raise money to help survivors. So I think this concert serves a lot of different functions, a platform to bring awareness to that, as well as bring a community together to reflect on our unique American experiences. So thank you very much for the time. Oh, one last thing. On a lighter note, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, tonight, tomorrow, and Saturday, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the moon landing. We have commissioned a work by Michael Dougherty, one of our most prominent American composers, that really tells the story of Neil Armstrong's journey. And it turns out Neil Armstrong really loved music, and he took 3 cassette tapes with him to outer space: Dvorak's New World Symphony, lounge music from the 60s, and euphonium music, because he played the euphonium. And Michael Dougherty has strung this piece together with all of these different elements. One of the movements is called Splashdown, just to give you a sense of his sense of humor. So come, if you can, to hear that work, plus Also sprach Zarathustra, the work that opens 2001 Space Odyssey, and a beautiful Mozart concerto. So anyway, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Before we begin our program, I would just love for us to get a glimpse of Murry Sidlin's captivating documentary, Defiant Requiem, which will be re-airing on PBS SoCal on Sunday, April 14th. Again, I repeat, it will be re-airing on PBS SoCal on Sunday, April 14th. Please take a look at Defiant Requiem.
I went downstairs and there was a man sitting, and she just said, "I want to know, do all of you like to sing?"
If people are robbed of freedom, they want to be creative, and they were.
Verdi's music is powerful. It represents a threat. And it was a tremendous challenge to have the Germans right there in front of us and tell them to their face,
It was something which made us strong. It has given us a resistance against our fate.
Doing a performance was not entertainment. It was a fight for life.
This Verdi's Requiem put all of us into another world. This was not the world with the Nazis. This was our world.
These were hours of pure joy, as much as you can call joy in camp.
Here they were, surrounded by man's worst, and these Jewish prisoners were determined to remind everyone of man's best. And I brought the Verdi here because I want to assure these people that we've heard them.
I don't think the soul has to be nourished by anything but by heavenly music. The soul doesn't need anything else.
Rabbi Cantor Marcia Tilton is the founder and spiritual leader of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, which is a nonprofit organization that innovates, supports, and collaborates on community programming that enriches the landscape of OC Jewish life and encourages individuals, couples, and families to connect their passions and purpose with Judaism. It is now my pleasure to present to you our guest speakers for the Art of Courage, Grace Over Hate, Murry Sidlin and Rabbi Cantor Marcia Tilton. Thank you.
How you doing, Murry? It's such an honor and really humble experience to be given the gift to speak with you today in front of this really thoughtful audience. And every time I see the trailer, I've also watched the full documentary. I'm a little teary right now because that's what that brought up for me. So forgive me if you hear a little sniffle. They showed that. So I've had a chance to spend some time with you over the last few months and understand your story, but I thought just for context for some of the new visitors in the room, would you share sort of a summary of how the whole project was born?
Well, I was living in Minneapolis at the time, excuse me, and I had just accepted a position at the Oregon Symphony in Portland, and I was winding up my life in Minneapolis after 4 or 5 years. And I was taking a walk on a spring afternoon in an area called Uptown, lots of bookstores and cafes and so forth, lovely area. And I passed by a place called the Bryn Mawr Bookstore, which was all used books, and they had a table out in front of the store, piled high with a variety of books, the sort of thing that you and I can't walk past. And I'm always sure that I'm going to find a first edition Shakespeare in there for $1.50, you know, I'm positive. So the pyramid of books was like this, and there was one book sort of sticking out, just in my direction. So I walked over and I took the book, and I was in a rather playful mood, and I just sort of pulled at it a little bit, and I was reaching the point of no return in pulling this book out. And I remember looking at my watch to see that if I catapulted the whole thing, did I have time to pick it all up, you know, or do I leave now? So I had an extra 10 minutes, so I thought I'll just go ahead with it. And I went like this and pulled it out, and the hole in the middle stayed, and everything was as it was. And I looked at the book, and it was entitled Music at Terezin. And I'm thinking to myself, Terezin. I thought that was a kind of showplace for the Nazis. Mm-hmm. That's what I thought at the time. I learned differently as life went on, but that's what I thought. And so I opened and I saw on the table of contents a list of names. So it was clear that this was a kind of primer. Who was at Terezin? What contributions did they make to musical lives, make as musicians before the war? What contributions did they make at Terezin to the environment? And should they have survived, what do we know about their lives in music after the war? So I opened the book randomly to a chapter, which is only a 3-page chapter, entitled Raphael, Schecter. And I stood on the street corner reading it, and it was just very, very skimpy. He was born in Romania, educated a little bit in Prague, and then into the city of Brno, where there was a wonderful conservatory of music, graduated with honors, went back to Prague, got a job in an opera company, ta-da. Typical life of a young musician working on getting up the ladder. But apparently, from what I could read between the lines, worthy. This guy was no joke. And it looked like he was headed toward a career, a significant career in opera conducting. And so the last paragraph said, and in Terezin, he put together a volunteer choir of 150 singers and taught them Verdi's Requiem by rote, because he only had the one score. He had the only score. Yeah, exactly. I mean, who else would have a score except a conductor who loved the piece tremendously. So, and he taught this volunteer choir to sing the Verdi Requiem and gave 16 performances of it between this date and that date. And I said, nonsense. I couldn't believe it. I mean, look, I know what it takes to put the Verdi Requiem together on optimum conditions. And this is a concentration camp. Let's translate, okay? Nothing nutritious. Everybody's sick a little bit or a lot. Everyone without any degree of protection from the winter cold, bone-chilling winter cold, and living in terror. And not only that, but this is a work so tremendously steeped in the Catholic liturgy. What in the world would this group of Jewish prisoners imprisoned because they were Jewish, why in the world would they reach out to a work of the Catholic liturgy? All these questions. No answers, but I thought, okay, this really bothers me. It bothers me because I was at the stage of my life where I was scared to death of erroneous information about the Holocaust, because the deniers and the revisionists are out there. We know that. We know it. We all know it. And so if this is not true, it has to be stopped. Somehow this has to be exposed for what it is. If it is true, then it just asks so many questions. It's a mysterious, whole major mystery. And so I began, therefore, the hunt to find out whether this was true or not. And what happened was, I know this is you asked me what time it was, and I'm telling you how to make a clock here. I'll just say that I very quickly after this was guided to several people who sang in the choir, one especially who was the roommate of the conductor, who I found in the Boston area, and they assured me that this was true. And that's now began the mystery of how I was going to let people know about the courage, the heroism, the dignity, and the extraordinary commitment to make their passions known.
So I just have a follow-up question, which is to say, from that moment until now, obviously it took on a life of its own. And I'm curious, is what you've been able to give the rest of the world, are you surprised where it's landed, I guess, is my question.
Well, if I may, I'm not in the business of correcting rabbis, but in this case,
I'm happy to be corrected.
It's not what I gave the world. It's what these people did. If I have any role, it's as a minor messenger. I'm telling their story.
Right.
They wouldn't do it themselves. You know why? I said to one of them, Edgar, this was the roommate of the conductor, Edgar Krause. And I said, Edgar, this is a very important story. This is incredibly important, what you people have done. And his attitude was, it's just something we did. I don't understand it. And I said, look, if you play poker and you fall asleep at the table, the cards speak for themselves. You have to understand how it would be perceived, the importance of this, the major importance of the commitment, the dedication, and all that. And so I thank you for your comment, but I really feel that every one of us, just the few people that I work with that are in the business of telling this story and getting this story out and bringing Defiant Requiem to a variety of communities to do that, it's we are just simply messengers.
I appreciate that, and thank you. So I was thinking a lot about just the whole concept of using a powerful piece of art to sustain yourself in a time of trouble. And of course, that has been a Jewish practice for thousands of years. We have always used the power of learning and the power of the pen to give ourselves strength when we had no physical prowess. So you can think about many aspects of the rabbinic enterprise, certainly, which this is not a Judaism 101 class, I won't go there, but I will say that as Passover comes, I was thinking about the song at the end of the Haggadah. We're about to have a Passover Seder, most of us, and there's a song at the end which seems like a childhood rhyme. It's about a little goat, and somebody's dad bought a goat, and then the cat ate the goat, and the dog bit the cat, and the stick hit the dog, and it's sort of one of those, it could be like the old lady who swallowed a fly kind of thing. But really, it did not appear in the Haggadah until the year 1590, and it is suspected, and of course, because we have remnants of Jewish texts, we suspected that it sort of had been composed on the heels of the Crusades, on the heels of the expulsion from Spain, or whatever, and that really there's a story to be told in Chad Gadya that is much more than about, like, you know, animals hitting each other and fire and whatever. And the ultimate triumph is that the angel of death comes and wipes everybody out, but not God. That ultimately God is the avenger of the ultimate. And I was thinking, about the story of the Defiant Requiem and that line when they're expressing something, and that's really, so there are many instances of that, but what I want to know is, are there other examples throughout history where music, theater, literature have been used for the purpose of what Raphael Schecter did in Terezin?
Well, I think it's very hard to find a musical composition that isn't on the side of inspiration and beauty and the betterment of mankind. There are pieces that were not designed that way, but have become used in that way. The Verdi Requiem in this case is one. I mean, I hope that people hear the Verdi Requiem in the concert hall as we present it, and will never again think of the Verdi without it being associated with the era of the Holocaust and what the prisoners did. And then there are other compositions which are specifically composed for the reason of illumination of injustice, or what man can and should do. few of those. So let's start with maybe the most famous of all, the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. The Beethoven Ninth Symphony is a very complicated composition. Now I know, you'll go and buy a ticket, can't wait for the first three movements to end, and let's get down to business, right? The Ode to Joy. But in actuality, the last movement doesn't work, really, unless you understand the first three. And what Beethoven has done is he has shown how mankind has failed. Everything is off-center. Harmonies don't go where they're supposed to go. Rhythms are erratic. The louds and softs have no meaning other than some sort of behavior which is unpredictable. In the second movement, for example, it is the same thing. It does not stabilize. In the third movement, where we think we finally have a respite from war, from inhumanity, in the third movement, everything is fine until toward the end of the movement, where trumpets and drums announce that they're only around the corner. And in the fourth movement, what's really interesting is that Beethoven begins that movement with a synopsis of the first three movements. Excerpts from the first three movements, which, if you didn't listen to the first three movements, you wouldn't know this.
Wow.
And so he is saying, not this, not that, nicht diesen Töne, not these sounds. And then at the end, he lapses gently into, and with that one, he goes ahead. With that one, he shows a fugue. What is a fugue if not 4 or 5 voices that work significantly together, that are, without compromise, fit so beautifully together? Isn't he saying, if man can design something as complex as a 5-voiced fugue, surely he can do something simple, like figure out how to work together, how to live together, how to honor and treasure each other. Surely it's what he is saying. And he comes back from the grave to tell us, not that we listen. Then there's this wonderful work by Benjamin Britten called the War Requiem. I mean, how more explicit can he be? This incredible piece of music, all built upon poetry. Well, of course, the text from the Mass, but poetry from World War I by, what's his name? The poet Wilfred Owen. Wilfred Owen, who wrote this beautiful poetry. He was wounded twice, and the last time he didn't survive. And Britain decided, with a small orchestra and a large orchestra and solo choirs and so forth, he doesn't beat us over the head. He pleads with us. Listen to the words of someone who was there. It's just a perfect composition for us to ponder and to take to heart. And then there is Haydn, Mass in Time of War, Tempori Belli. So there are pieces throughout history which really go to the heart of it, go to the core of it. What's the sad part is they go way back, and we still, just sort of pass it off. What happens in this, in the Requiem Mass here, this was not a work in any way, shape, or form designed to degrade or to yell against war in the way that we may think, because it's such a powerful and dramatic work. But there are some words in this Mass that I think were the motivating text by this conductor to do that piece in that setting. It simply says this in the Requiem Mass: Quid latet apparebit, nil in nullum remanebit. Whatever is hidden shall become evident. And, here it comes, nothing shall remain unavenged. Now, the text was written in the Mass for the individual. If you don't subscribe to what God has told you, then you will invite the vengeance. Vengeance is mine, says God. If you don't do that, well, they didn't see it that way. They're singing this to the Nazis. They're singing to this, and nothing shall remain unavenged. This was their way of lifting their fist and saying, your time will come. And that, I think, that's only, one line. It takes 4 minutes to spread this out and say it over a 90-minute work. But it was the motivating line. It was the one part of the Mass where Raphael Schecter says, okay, this we must sing. Because we can sing to them things we cannot say to them.
Right.
And this is, so that's a little bit of it.
Well, that's actually a very dramatic history and understanding of the capacity for art in all forms to sustain us even in the bleakest times. I think that and many of the people that we even captured on the film shared that. I'd love to know if in the years that you've been performing this, have you heard any other stories, or has anybody sort of expressed a feeling whereby they got something from either the experience of being there? I don't know if you've met other people who actually were in attendance, or heard about other ways that this kind of mechanism is used to give people strength in the bleakest moments.
Yeah, I've got one story that is profound. It happened a couple of years ago. I was giving a talk at Heschel High School in Manhattan, and on the occasion of Kristallnacht. And after I finished the speech, a number of people very kindly came over to greet me and to thank me, which I appreciated very much. And toward the back of the line was a rather tall, elegant man who was obviously quite elderly. And as he came forward, he waited very patiently. And then he came forward and grabbed my hand, and he says, my name is Frederick Terna. I later learned it was T-E-R-N-A, Frederick Terna. And I want you to know that I attended 3 performances of the Verdi Requiem at Terezin as a prisoner in the concentration camp. So you can imagine, my breath just fell. And I could not talk to him there because there were just too many people around. I got his contact information, and about less than a week later, I was in his living room in Brooklyn, and we had quite a remarkable chat. Why did you go to 3 performances of the Requiem? How old were you at the time? I was 18, 19. Okay. Did you come from a musical family? Was it Verdi's music? No, I didn't know anything about Verdi or anything. I did not come from a musical family. I never played a musical instrument. Once in a while we listened to music on the radio, but I had no specific or special or integrated musical life growing up. Then why did you go? He said, well, I went for the first one because a friend of mine, I'd made friends in the camp, a man by the name of, naturally I can't remember his name, Karel Berman. He was the bass soloist in the Verdi at Terezin. Turned out he survived the war and had a major career as a bass singer all over Europe after the war. He was singing, so I thought as a courtesy I should go and if I can. It was very hard to get a ticket, but I got a ticket. Tickets were not sold, but they only had so many seats, so you had to have a ticket to go in. So he goes and he hears the first one, and then he goes back for performances 2 and 3 after that. Why did you do that? He said, I went because of the harmony. And I said, yes, it's a beautiful work. Verdi has written a magnificent composition. He says, no, not that. The kind of harmony I'm talking about was that on stage there was an harmonious event. Explain yourself. Well, he said, we lived in chaos and insanity. That was our lives. Chaos and insanity. I mean, somebody could walk up to you and rifle butt you for no good reason other than the fact that you looked at the person the wrong way. They could shoot people. They could hurt people. They could do all sorts of things with impunity. That was our life. And we had very little in the way of nutrition. We worked 8 days, 12-hour days, and then we had a half a day off. And so we had lives that were tentative at best. Mm-hmm. And so, but when I went and I saw what happened on stage, I recognized harmony, harmonious. There was this man, see, there was 150 people on stage, and there was this man in the center, and through movement of his arms, he was suggesting. He was not screaming, yelling, shooting, throwing things. He was suggesting. And because of the beauty of his movements, they sang in collaboration with those gestures. When it was strong and vivid and active, that's how they sounded. And when it was quiet and passionate like this, that's how they sounded. And so this entire choir voluntarily sang according to his suggested movements. And so I found this to be an organization in harmony, the way life used to be. The way life used to be. And he said, I went back for the other 2 times because just to be in the presence of something harmonious was enormously rare and inspiring.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty beautiful. You know, that story makes me think of the very last line that we say every time we say a Kaddish, or we close in Amidah, we say, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu. May the Creator, the one who created elegance and peace among the heavenly bodies, please create peace among about what's going on earth. And that's really what he was saying. Yeah. Just by being able to watch. Yeah. That's a gorgeous story. Thank you for sharing that.
May I insert just one more thing?
Please.
When we did the performance of the Verdi, when we did the Defiant Requiem at the Kennedy Center in Washington back in 2012, one of the people that came to the performance was then Archbishop Timothy Dolan. Now it's Cardinal Dolan. And he came because a group of his cleric friends and colleagues knew about this and suggested that he come down. And so he came down to see it. And I went to see him after at the reception. And I said, so tell me, Your Eminence, how do you feel about this group of Jews taking your Requiem Mass and using it for their own nutrition? And he looked at me and he says, you got that wrong. I said, excuse me? He says, it's not our Requiem Mass. The Mass comes from the Psalms of David. All they did was take it back.
Wow. Oh, God, it's incredible. I want to learn a little bit more, and I'd love for us to learn a little bit more about the foundation. Obviously, there are many components to the work that is being done. I'd love to learn more about who's on your staff, the kinds of programs you are initiating, things you're looking to do down the road or whatever. Can you share a bit about that?
Sure. We would have never had a foundation had it not been for the generosity and dedication of primarily one person by the name of Stuart Eizenstat. Stu has spent the vast majority of his adult life, in addition to being on Jimmy Carter's domestic policy advisor and being a very prominent attorney in Washington in international negotiations. In addition to all that, the amount of time he has spent raising money for survivors is incredibly significant. I mean, billions. He, with the joint claims and with this group and with that group and serving on that board, But that's one of the things that he and his late wife did together constantly. And so he came to Terezin to see Defiant Requiem when we did it there for the following reason. There was a conference in Prague, Holocaust conference on returning assets and art and property and so forth. That took place in Prague. And then there were a lot of proposals that came out of that conference. And the people who were there, it was 47 nations, 700 delegates. The people who were there wanted all the proclamations to be signed on the grounds of a concentration camp. So it could say, in Terezin, on this day, you know, and then there's the undersign. It was very important. Happened to be the day that the Czech government asked us to come and do Defiant Requiem for this group, for these people who were in Prague, and now they were in Terezin, 40-some miles away. After the performance was over, he came over to me and grabbed my hand, and he says, we have to bring this to the Kennedy Center, and I have other ideas as well. Well, thank you, Ambassador Eizenstat. That's wonderful. I appreciate that very much. Knowing that'd be the last time we ever saw each other, it happens. People say, "I'm going to be in touch with you," and I know they mean well. I know they mean well, but you know, you could simply grab their hand and say, "And sayonara." But so at any rate, he says, "When are you back in the States?" I said, "Tomorrow. I'll be teaching at Aspen for the rest of the summer." And he said, "Okay, I'll be in touch." Well, okay, so I went to Aspen the next day, day later, set up the computer, and there was a message from him. Here are some 3 dates in September. Can you come to see me any one of these 3 dates? So I said, yes, fine. Thinking, well, this is only July. There'll be a cancellation. You know. I was not the optimist on things like this, but sure enough, I went to see him, and he laid out a whole plan, and then he says, where do we go from here? That was the beginning of the foundation. And I said, okay, as long as you ask. Look, this is a story that needs to be seen, heard, and told. And I said, I think that the foundation should have essentially one mission, which is just simply to bring forward and to illuminate the legacy of Terezin. The prisoners, the artists, the scholars, and the place itself. It needs to be told. Okay, so that's how that started, and that's what we did. From Defiant Requiem, we developed and finished the film. The film took 6 years to make, and we are told that we're 2 years ahead of the national average on a documentary. And I believe it. I believe it. But we had wonderful people who came to us, and we worked with them, and so the film, to this day, I mean, this is 2019, and it still has a lot of interest. We present it, and we now have a 45-minute version to be seen in schools, and we have a new website of lesson plans that we're just now unveiling. And in addition to that, we have another performance called Hours, that's H-O-U-R-S, Hours of Freedom. Hours of Freedom tells the story of, how are we doing on time? Great. Okay. Hours of Freedom tells the story of 15 composers and 18 of their compositions composed at Terezin.
Wow.
They called themselves the New Music Studio. This is a concentration camp. Can you imagine? Okay, in LA, you got 3 of those. And in New York, and Chicago, and in Berlin, and Jerusalem, everywhere you go, you expect to see an organization, the New Music Studio of blank. But these people, with such faith in the future, got together, and they were going to create music that could be performed. And the music was all in different categories. It was music of longing, and music of hope, and music as eyewitness. And music that was subject to censorship, et cetera, et cetera.
May I ask one more question? So that's incredible that you're even exposing more of the treasures that came out of this. And it really, what you just shared, that is the title of today's event, The Art of Courage, Grace Over Hate. It really, so that's so beautiful. Thank you. And I wish you great luck in building these curricula, and may they reach so many people whose lives they'll inspire. So, Murry, I have a question. You are, the consummate musician, conductor, renowned world over. If, God forbid, you were in a position where you had to fill a suitcase quickly and you didn't know exactly where you're going or for what, have you ever thought about what music you would take with you? I mean, Raphael, and I'm not saying that to be like a dark person. I'm just thinking like he took Verdi's Requiem. He could have taken any number of things. So what would you take?
We're out of time, right?
You don't have to answer that.
Marcia. That is a profound question. It really is. The other day, I heard a very short piece of music that I hadn't heard in a long time. And I just couldn't get over it. And I took out the CD. I heard it on the radio, and I took out my CD, and I played it about 7 or 8 times. And it's only about an 8 or 9 minute piece. And it's Violin Sonata by Aaron Copland. And I thought to myself, within the sparsity of notes, within the calm relationship of ease and dissonance, there is such a vision, a prophetic vision of goodness and hope. It is so American. It is so, so, so American of what we can become, and a people always in the state of evolution and progress. And these two instruments, one of them intervals in search of a melody, and the other one just tonal harmonies as a root base of it all, as we have our own root base. And is that the piece I would take? You asked me today, I would say, that's it. Ask me tomorrow, and I'll give you another one.
Thank you, Murry Sidlin. Thank you, Rabbi, Cantor, Marcia, Tilton. At this time, we have a moment maybe for a couple questions. We have any questions? Joellen.
I have 2. Will you tell us what eventually happened to Raphael Schecter, and then briefly tell the story of that performance in the fall of 1944 in front of the Red Cross?
Raphael Schecter was sent to Auschwitz on October 16th, 1944, along with the majority of the other composers and the vast majority of his choir. He was in Auschwitz a short time, but he was apparently gave the illusion of being well enough for labor, continued labor, because they moved him out, and they moved him out, and they moved him out. He went to 3 concentration camps beyond Terezin. And then what we know, and seems to have been proven, is that he died on a death march in late March 1945, 1 month before liberation.
Wow.
1944. The big question that still hangs in the air is, was Eichmann there or not? And we don't know. We don't really know. It's quite likely he was, but no one has committed to identifying that. So this bunch of Nazis come in. They came from Prague. They came from Berlin. It was a big deal because the Red Cross was there, and only a couple of people from the Red Cross. One, a very young person named Roussel. I can't think of his first name offhand. He got this as a political appointee. His father got him the job. His father was very big in the Swiss government. And so they came, and they stayed for about 6 hours, and they heard the Verdi Requiem. One member of the Nazi contingent said, "These crazy Jews singing their own Requiem." And they went and gave an ideal report. This guy, this Roussel, when he was confronted many years later by, do you know the name Claude Lanzmann? Not only a filmmaker, but a filmmaker mostly about Holocaust material.
Did the Shoah?
He did the Shoah series, a 9-hour
Yes.
series for public television, or for television worldwide. And there is an outtake from the Shoah series that they have at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. And the outtake shows Lanzmann asking him, why didn't you, really investigate more fully? There were things that needed to be seen. And his response was, look, if there was something wrong, all they had to do was hand me a piece of paper and I would have investigated. And I thought Lanzmann was going to come across the table at him. I thought it was such an insulting, horrid thing, as if the responsibility was on the prisoner.
Oh my God.
And they did not go inside. They just followed the path the Nazis wanted them to see. There was beautiful new plumbing hooked up to nothing, and that's still there. You can see it. And outdoor patients who were sick in the sun, children getting bread and butter, which they had never seen since they'd been in the camp, and so forth. It was all a lie. It was all an incredible, unspeakable lie. And Roussel would own up to nothing about that. I forgot the question, but I think that's...
No.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Anyone else? Yes.
I just also thank you very much for bringing this to us. But I'm really interested in this catalyzing moment that you experienced in this bookstore in Minneapolis that that brought you as a messenger to the world to tell this story. It seems to me that you are an individual that's uniquely qualified of anybody, and here you are in the bookstore whimsically pulling this book out of this stack. And I want to know personally your understanding of that. Is there a transcendent understanding of that? Are you simply a messenger that found an opportunity, or I'm interested to understand your deeper meaning and understanding of this and your role in this?
When I was 6, 7 years old, we got a letter from the International Red Cross that verified that my grandmother, my father's mother, was murdered by the Einsatzgruppen outside of Riga in Latvia, along with a number of other relatives of hers and his. My father was already in the States, of course, for many years. He escaped all kinds of things and managed to get there. And so the explanation of that, and then he verified it by, in those days, if you went to the Jewish newspaper, the Forward, they printed the names of the dead, and he found the names of his relatives and his mother. So my 3 sisters and I were then subjected to a rather intense study period, many years, of the Shoah at home. And so I was never out of, let's say, thought. I was never far away from any thought whenever there was the opportunity, something on television, some movie, whatever it was, to relive those drastic moments when my father found out and how we as a family responded. But, I didn't obsess. I just went ahead with life. But every now and then something happened and brought back all the things that I was supposed to remember and supposed to do something about if the opportunity came to me. And then I found this book.
That's a miracle in our time, I would say. Somebody was speaking to you. I don't know. But that's a beautiful story. Marty, what a wonderful question.
Thank you again to our guests. Before we conclude today's program, I would like to thank each and every one of you for joining us for this crucial dialogue about the importance of choosing grace over hate. I would also like to once again thank all of our sponsors for allowing us to have these important conversations. On a special note, we'd like to thank Cox Communications for their assistance in broadcasting our programs on local cable television and on-demand channels. We hope you'll join us for our conversation with newly appointed Cal State Fullerton President Fram Verdi on Thursday, May 9, and State Treasurer Fiona Ma on Thursday, May 16. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.